So good afternoon. We are here for our last conversation celebrating Bell Hooks' life and legacy. I'm so excited to be a part of this esteemed group, our colleagues, Beverly, Guy-Sheftall, Evelynn, Hammonds, Noliwe, Rooks. What you all should know, it was the brain power of everybody here who said, let's come together and let's do something. And this is really exciting. Bell Hooks once said, I will not have my life narrowed down. I will not bow down to somebody else's whim or to someone else's ignorance. And I think about that quote from Bell, and I think about the times in which we live in, as the last panel discussed. And I'm wondering how, and sometimes the anger that rises up out of the current space we find ourselves in, how can we use Bell and her legacy, her teachings, to help us in this moment? I think of Bell as being free, and not because she has transitioned to a different space, but because of who she is and how she lived her life on her own terms. And I wonder what she would tell us to do, and how can you use your scholarship to help us get to a place that will address some of the things that we face now?
We're looking at you, Beverly. We all looking at you.
Okay, I'm gonna say a couple of things that I hope will not be perceived to be coming from an ageist place. I do think that we have some generational challenges, which Bell talked a lot about. And what I mean by that is celebrityism, individualism, materialism, being seen, those things have really seduced young people in the U.S. In ways that are very, very disturbing. And one of the things, and we were sort of talking about this, one of the things that Rebecca reminded me of, Bell Hooks never got any awards. Sonia Sanchez now at the end of her life is getting some.
Yes.
Okay, she never got any awards, she never got a MacArthur, she never had an endowed chair. And if I will tell you, which I won't, what her salary was at Berea College, you would be stunned. So the financial stability that Bell Hooks got was not from her salaries in the university. It was from her very careful purchasing of real estate that she then resold. So she wouldn't even have the financial stability that she ended up having. She didn't get big speaking engagement fees. Wow. She wasn't this big public intellectual. And also think about it, her books were published by small presses. But before that, before being no, not Kitchen Table, South End Press. So she didn't have all of the things that, unfortunately, I think this younger generation attaches a lot of importance to. She didn't care that she was not on television or being interviewed, in certain kinds of ways. And she and I would talk about that, what it means in our classes to have our students move away from capitalism and individualism and the desire for BMWs and the desire for certain kind of material wealth. And so that's one of the things that I think that we need to have a much more cross-generational talk about what is really important in life. And what is not important is all of the things that this culture convinces you will make you happy. And so I think that we've got those challenges, and I'm happy to take them on in class.
But I think you make some good points, Beverly. But I also feel that it's a deeper problem, because I think it speaks more to the sense of really having and occupying an oppositional position to what is presented to us as right now. And I'm going to follow generational arc a little bit. That things have progressed so far, or that we can relax and rest. And I think of Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois, and those folks. They were like, yeah, we can't ever turn our eyes away from what is really happening to our people. And the minute we do, then we're in trouble. And I think the cult of celebrity, the focus on sort of certain individuals, African Americans in particular, who've achieved a great deal in this culture. People have MacArthur's, people have TV shows, people have production studios, they have all of this. But what part of what they've earned have they then turned to be in service of all of our people who are still disenfranchised? And that commitment to turning it that way is what I am worried about with in certain respects about the younger generation. And then when you ask what they want to do, it's almost as if they can't really articulate that, many of our students, and that deeply troubles me, because I'm sort of, look at what Ida B. Wells did when, what were we talking about, 100 years ago? Over 100 years ago? And, put their lives on the line. She was not a poor person at the time. Look at Du Bois. He was of Harvard. I should say it this way. He would say he was in Harvard, but not of Harvard. And he turned the skills that he learned at Harvard into creating a new kind of social sciences service of Black people. And so I want to see, when am I going to see the things being turned around to be in service of people who still need help, and continue to challenge the deeply, deeply embedded structures of racism in this country. And I want to see that. I want to hear people being committed to that. And being committed to that means being sort of be a celebrity, but what are you going to do with that? And we should be asking people, what are you going to do with it? And I think that's the question that this generation faces. But then I also think we have a responsibility, and if we don't speak up right now in the face of this extraordinary challenge, then we will not have been in service of the people in the ways that we want to be as educators.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with a young person at the break when y'all started without me. I was actually talking to the young people up there, who was saying that part of what had come out of the conversation was making them really feel like there was a responsibility to do something, hearing about this, but also recognizing that they had not encountered bell hooks in a classroom. They're ethnic studies, majoring in ethics, and saying, it seems like I should have come across this work in ethnic studies. And what I'm thinking is two things about that. One, we are, many of us believe, I'm one of them, that we are facing an onslaught and a threat that we have not seen in an age. This is not business as usual. This is not we're always in crisis. This is not things are always precarious. something else is happening. And woe be unto any of you that think that higher education is the vanguard of some revolutionary onslaught. We are not here. The corporation that is Brown University, the corporations that are many of the well-endowed schools, have a business ethos as much as anything else. And the moment, that moment of bell hooks at coming out of Stanford, going to Yale, she actually is a model for how in this business you can, in fact, start to have young people synthesize what it means to be anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchal, to see the structures that are attempting to undo the life of you and yours, and to begin to think your way out of it. That's not the norm. You know, I wish it were. It was norm for me, you know, at Spelman with some people I had, but that comes to some particular kinds of teachers who believe that part of what we're trying to do is give young people the tools to see these structures as some of needing to be dismantled, and understanding the personal costs that come along with that. You may not get the Guggenheim. You may not get the McKinsey Fellowship. You may not be at Goldman Sachs. But other choices might have kept us from this moment that could be an apocalypse. Right? And so these spaces aren't designed for liberation. but it is the case that there's sometimes some of us who inhabit them, who believe that that's what we've been charged to do. The thing is, if that's what you're interested in, you have to find it. But institutionally, like I'm concerned, like I'm trying to figure out who I need to go talk to in ethnic studies. That you are like literally, I can do that. Like I can find out what is it that is happening in your classrooms that no one, a student is saying they have never encountered this revolutionary thinker that is bell hooks. The second part of that, and then I'm gonna stop really, is at lunch we were also just talking about how many Black women scholars and thinkers end up relatively unknown. Right. And Beverly was sharing that this was a fear that bell hooks had, that no one would know her. I recently learned Audre Lorde had a similar kind of, you know, that she just wasn't, because she wasn't getting the amplification. She wasn't getting, that she just wouldn't be known. And I just wrote a book on Mary McLeod Bethune, and it's just a whole thing there. I can go, like, just don't get me started on her. But she's what started me on that road. When you see the arc of the contribution, which similar to Gloria, similar to Lani Guinier, and the absence, the intellectual absence of their presence. And that's as scary to me. Yes. As what's happening in the nation. Because who do you have to be if you can write 30 books, if you can inspire the way that we've heard, if you can think rings around most of Western intellectual thought, and you're worried you won't be remembered, and it's a real fear. There's a reason for you to worry. You're not just paranoid.
So what strikes me about the panelists today and you all, and assessing bell hooks and Lani, is your shared experiences at different times at historically Black college or university. So I think,
well,
I know,
experience.
yes.
Yeah, this Spelman, we could sing the Spelman hymn up here right now. This is all Spelman right here, let me say.
But I think about how do we, how can institutions like Brown, non-HBCUs, outside of Africana Studies, outside of ethnic studies, outside of women's studies, make bell hooks accessible to everyone? So I also, Damaris, introduced to bell very late in my life and my academic career. And, you know, in part because of perhaps what I chose to focus on academically. And it's because of not having that kind of access and not being aware, having read her works, that I feel cheated, and I feel like there was, that she's a great gift, and that she was someone who was free, and her work was very instructive. But I feel like to so many, I'm trying to follow my thoughts here, I feel like for so many people that Belle is not understood, and while they may have heard of her, they may not know where to begin. And so my questions to you all, somebody said it earlier, and I believe Rebecca suggested it, but what's the first book that you would, for someone who's never, not myself, but for someone who has never read Belle, or for someone who is new to Belle?
I gotta say this.
Okay.
Most HBCUs are not teaching bell hooks.
Exactly.
Okay?
Oh,
So it's not just ethnic studies at Brown.
Okay.
Okay. Number two, bell hooks is not in our ADW syllabus at Spelman. Okay? So you could actually go through Spelman and not necessarily encounter bell hooks. So I need to say that radical black feminist writers are not necessarily, ain't you clapping over there, are not necessarily being read at HBCUs, which is why we asked Mellon for some funds to do this work, gender and sexuality studies at HBCU. So I just really need to say that.
Yes.
I think one of the things I want to say, and speak to this question in a slightly different way. I just did a consultancy at a small liberal arts college in the Northeast, and that's all I'm going to say about where it was. And, you know, faculty have had discussions. They want to institute an anti-racist curriculum, similarly to some of the efforts going on at various schools around the country, including Harvard. And what I always find in those conversations are people who say, well, you know, maybe we should just hire one person who knows all of this literature that you know, Evelynn, like the African American literature, including black women's literature, black feminist issues, African American history writ large, all of this, and then we can maybe just move them around in different departments, and that person can introduce our students to all of this. And I'm like, you know what does it mean to be an educated person in this country anymore? Do you think most people who consider themselves educated in this country say, well, you know, I couldn't possibly say anything to have anything to do with Shakespeare. I'm not a Shakespearean scholar, but you know who Shakespeare is? You've seen you've read a play, or you've heard about a play, or you've seen a movie. Most people who call themselves educated would be embarrassed if they did not know who Shakespeare is. I want people to be embarrassed not knowing who Bell Hooks is. I want them to be embarrassed not knowing who Lani Guinier is. What it means to be an educated person in this country is that you have come in contact with some of the best thinkers of a generation. That's everybody's responsibility, and you don't get to hire one person who runs around and tells everybody, you know, what book they should have read, what book they shouldn't have read, all this kind of stuff. Because if you're committed to it, it would have already been there for everybody to have to come to terms with. And I say that with some emotion because I feel like I've been in the academy now 36 years, and I'm like, really? So you don't have to stretch. I am a historian of American science and medicine, and public health and African American studies and women and gender studies. I am an interdisciplinary scholar. What that means is I read constantly all across, and I still read Shakespeare because that's what you do. That's part of the intellectual culture in liberal arts colleges, is that you understand the great works. I may not like it, but I understand who Shakespeare was and why he was important to people to be thinking about. Okay, so I do not understand, and I'm getting really, really tired after 36 years of trying to explain why you don't have the same commitment to understanding W.E.B. Du Bois and all these other folks that we're talking about, and Ida B. Wells and everybody in this country, but not to mention just African American scholars and intellectuals and artists and all of that, but for people of color who made this country what it is. Why you don't know any Native American writers? You've not read any Latino and Latinx folks? You've not read any Asian American people? How? Then you're not an educated person anymore. Yep. And you ought to be saying, well, here I am, 70 years old, and I'm not even really educated. I guess I better get to work. I guess I better start thinking about it. And that's my sense is we have allowed ourselves a pass to what the real commitment, it seems to me, that a liberal arts colleges are supposed to be about. Du Bois went and studied in Berlin. He understood the great German traditions of social science. He brings them back. He uses them in all kinds of things. And he was an amazingly interdisciplinary person, too. I'm not comparing myself to Du Bois. But I think that there's a kind of resistance that we have normalized that says that we can't, everybody's not responsible for this. And I think that's part of what comes through in Belle's work and Lani's work, that you can't not know these things. It's not okay anymore. And they both did incredible work to hold our attention front and center. Lani on her work on voting rights and what it means that everybody should have a right to vote as a citizen in this country, and how do we do that? And just laser focused on it. As Belle was, and say, when she, would talk about, structures of oppression, and I'm going to stop here, that she wasn't just talking to people of color, she was talking to everybody. And the fact that when she gave that commencement address and people booed her, those people booed her because they know that she was talking about them. And they didn't like being talked about to their faces at commencement.
Can I say one little thing? Yeah. I tell my students when I'm talking about Bell Hooks that she read before she got sick about 10 books a day across all kinds of categories. And one of the moments in my teaching career, which is now 53 years, a student came up to me afterwards, and because we know this, they did not grow up reading the way we did. She said, "Could you give me a reading list? Could you give me a reading list of books that I can read?" And it was just from saying, this person that is a big intellectual still reads every day. So I just wanted to say that.
I want to say, for those of y'all who've seen, I know I've been living in a world where Florida and the AP tests loom large. It's also because I'm teaching a class about racism and education this semester. But there's something that was circulating around about things that had been taken out of the African American AP curriculum that just had a bunch of names with red strike-throughs going through it. And Bell Hooks was on it, James Baldwin, Sylvia Winter, Kim Crenshaw, Angela Davis, blah, blah, blah. And one thing I want to say, for anyone who is decrying what is happening in Florida with DeSantis and that AP and those writers, if you look in the mirror and you haven't read those writers, you should be quiet. You have access to those writers. You're grown. If your outrage is about what's being struck for other people, and you have no knowledge of most, like maybe you've read one or two, this is a black radical, revolutionary, radical tradition that they took out, not just black thinkers.
Yep.
And so when you ask where to start with Bell Hooks, for me it's a kind of a loaded question, because it depends on for what. She wrote so many things, different genres, different periods of time, different things that she was interacting with. Right in through here, I love Margin the Center, but that's, I think I said earlier, that's just because as we are pushed farther and farther into the margins of democratic thinking, of American society, of economic viability, of mental health, of what is happening to black people in all these markers of health, educational, economic, cultural, social. We are losing ground. And so the margins are in fact becoming this space, a theoretical space in which we live, an actual space in which more and more of us live. And there's a way, so she was writing about specifically white feminists, the feminist movement, and what black people were doing, and you know, how there's always this kind of claim that certain writers are marginalized. So in that book, she wants to problematize that idea of the margins as lacking power, as a whole separate kind of place. And she wants to reclaim it as a place where organizing is happening, where thought bridging is happening, where politics is taking place, and to decenter that center that is the status quo, right? In this moment, for me, that thinking is really important, right? Just for the sheer teaching to transgress is nobody, if you're in the classroom, and you give any thought to your pedagogy at all, or if you're in the classroom and trying to understand your professor's pedagogy and pedagogical practices, or maybe make some sense out of what's working for you, what's not working for you, to get to, again, if you're interested in a radical praxis, because you don't read bell hooks for how do I design a syllabus. That's not, you know, that's not where she's going to take you. But if you want to talk about voice and writing and thinking and how to construct a class to heighten some of these issues that are useful, then that book, I think, is wonderful. And it just memoirs, someone else said bone black. I find a beautiful thing. So she got 30 books. I understand that could be intimidating, and people are not like, let's just read all the bell hooks. But few of them are more than 200 and some pages, though, so you really could. You're not talking about 500-page tomes. But to start, and then the stuff that she did in her later life about the politics of love it is extraordinary. I mean, the stuff she's done on love is just extraordinary. We often, if you, now I'm gonna get in the weeds a little bit. So for those of us who teach Afro-American studies, we often start with James Baldwin and talking about love. We often talk about MLK and his beloved community and talking about love as we're going through history and literature. Love, centering love is not unusual for thinkers, right? Like trying to marshal. But the way that Gloria theorizes, the way bell hooks theorizes love as practice and praxis, I think there's no better place to start for that.
That's where I would start too, because just personally and professionally, her writings about the radical power of love is, to me, helpful at this particular moment, or else I would be angry 100% of my day. And that is not how I want to spend my days. I like to spend my days thinking about what it means when she says we're here to love. And it helps break that anger that like that cloud that I walk under all the time, all over the place, and helps put me in a different frame for confronting, you know, all the issues that you were just talking about. So personally, it's a time of life for me where that is some of her most important writing for me, and where I get to reflect on life differently.
I just want to just pivot just a little bit, and thinking of Belle, but also thinking of each of you and your bodies of work. And can you share a little bit of whatever area of your work that you would like to, that you feel connects a great deal to Belle?
Oh, wait, I can go first with this, because when I was in grad school and wrote my dissertation, so my dissertation, which became my first book, is a book about the politics of hair, and for black women. It's called Hair Raising Beauty Culture in Afro-American Women. And for two reasons, bell hooks was central. One, just had to do with her making it possible to think about the aesthetics, about black aesthetics, as a topic worthy of study in the academy. Bodily aesthetics, hair, skin color, how we dress. She noticed like these are things that she noticed and that she theorized regularly. And before her, I didn't have a coherent body of thought that I could see myself engaging that was about something as intimate and yet as unknown. It's sort of hair, like there are no black women I talked to about hair that were kind of like, I never thought about any of those things. However, there are all kinds of people who are like, really? All of that's going on? There's like femininity. Gloria had written a book, an essay, and I don't remember where it is, but there's this line where she said, our femininity is in our hair. And that, like just being able to, and then she went on to talk about how that's ridiculous and you need to do other things, but just locating such a large construct as femininity in hair gave me the permission to think and to dream similarly. And then, because I had to fight everybody to get that book, for them to let me do it as a dissertation, because the white women and men who I had to propose my topic to were all like, but that's not scholarly. I mean, we're not getting a dissertation. We're not making you a doctor based on you wanted to say some things about hair and black women. But she, honestly, it's her. She gave me a certain kind of intellectual and institutional permission to keep pushing, to keep pressing, to keep figuring out what's the argument, what's the way. It was never a question of changing my topic, though I was told I needed to. It was a question of strategizing my way to get them to agree to it, and not to be completely hostile, because that's just the that's just Sisyphean. You just don't want to fight that. Your whole committee is like, this sucks, this is stupid. You decide to write it. Everything you get back from them is going to be, this sucks, this is stupid. So she gave me a way to convince them that this was not didn't suck and stupid. It was like, wow, it's original. No, we just don't know this. And perhaps starting with something that black women know, maybe a different starting point, but maybe we should start there. And it was literally her who I marshaled regularly in emails and arguments to get that done.
You want me to go? Yeah. Okay, I think also from margin to center, and that is specifically because after my time in graduate school as a physicist and in my working as an engineer and going back to school to get my PhD in history of science, believe me, the contributions of African Americans or any other people of color to the development of American science was as much of a non-starter as black women's hair.
Yeah.
It was like, why would you want to write about these people who've never won a Nobel Prize? These people have never had made serious contributions to anything important. We don't have a single paper that's, the most important paper in any scientific field that was written by a black person. I mean, why, in what possible interest could there be in writing about the African Americans, men and women, and I wanted to write about black women and science, that couldn't possibly be of any value whatsoever. And unlike Noliwe, in terms of my dissertation, I realized that I could not fight that tide by myself. So they really pushed me to have to prove that I could be a real historian of science first, and then after I finished my dissertation and that first book, then I could go and do that other kind of stuff, which was going to be about race that by then they wouldn't care whatever I did. And that's pretty much what I did. But so I've been preoccupied with this notion of margin to center for mostly all of my work that I do on the history of African Americans in American science. And so that work has continued to be pivotal for me, as well as I said yesterday, becoming gentlemen, because that is what Lani was talking about, and I was fortunate to have many conversations with her about what it would mean to not think about what African Americans were doing in the scientific and technical enterprise. It was important to find those people who were doing stuff that had just been ignored. Like many of you must know Hidden Figures. If you've not read the book, you've seen the movie. And, you know, finding that there were black folks who were doing things. And then not just finding that they were doing high-level scientific and technical work, but trying to understand the structures that erase their contributions. So I've been thinking about those for a long time. It was those two, Becoming Gentlemen and From Margin to Center, that's how I think about the whole project of trying to understand the ways in which American science, medicine, public health has been organized to produce the marginalization of black people.
I think it would be hard for people to realize how difficult it was to be an out feminist if you were my age. And at the beginning, I mean, and I'm talking about in the black community. And I will not mention some of those experiences. Well, you got located as hating a black man, being divisive, being a lesbian, being unattractive, all of those things. Bell Hooks was the person who was the most out feminist. I don't care where she was and what she named herself a feminist. And she was, put into that category. So it was really hard. I share this with my students. Now anybody can say they're a feminist and the community is not going to demonize you. And so I started, so for me it's Words of Fire, my favorite book of mine, because it's an anthology. So I started collecting, while I was doing the PhD at Emory, and I had no issues, did a dissertation on attitudes toward black women 1880 to 1920. And I discovered Anna Julia Cooper in the library while I'm a doctoral student at Emory. I mean, I literally put my hand up there, and here came a voice from the South. And I sat there, and I read it. And I asked myself, why have I never heard of Anna Julia Cooper? Okay. So I started collecting black feminist writing because I was just sick of people saying, why are you calling yourself a feminist? Feminism is white and blah, blah, blah. So Bell Hooks and I, Gloria and I would talk about that all the time. We need to establish that black women and some men have been feminists, going back to Mariah Stewart in 1835. And so for me, the Words of Fire and our conversations and our experiences as an out feminist made me say, if I don't do anything else in life, I want to do this anthology that traces our feminist thinking, theorizing, and that's the impact that her work and many other black women's work had on me. And I'm mentioning one other thing which people don't know. Bell Hooks couldn't get her dissertation on Toni Morrison published.
Right.
Okay, she had a PhD in English, and she could never get her dissertation on Toni Morrison published. So I just wanted, and she we would talk about that. Now we can't imagine, because Toni Morrison has become Toni Morrison, but anyway, it was Words of Fire.
And that's the story, because Unarmed Women is her first book, right?
Mm-hmm. That she started writing when she was an undergraduate at Stanford.
Because she couldn't get the Morrison book published. So you want to know why some of us say she's a genius. She couldn't get her dissertation published. The work she started doing as an undergraduate ended up becoming her first book,
right,
which is Unarmed Woman, which is about black women's relationship, long history to feminism, and really, again, is a classic. It's a classic text. That's not the norm. Not everybody is pulling. I mean, I got brilliant students, but they're not sort of pulling out papers that they're going to turn into iconic texts so far.
So here we are celebrating Bell and Lani, and the fear was that she would be forgotten, as it was mentioned a little bit earlier, the way that Zora had been forgotten for so many years. What kinds of things beyond a symposium, and can institutions do to ensure that Bell not only continues and is introduced to new generations, but also is amplified more in the academy and outside the academy.
Well, one thing I'll say is that we could have the endowed chair, the endowed Bell Hooks chair. I mean, we have at Spelman the endowed queer study, Audre Lorde Queer Studies chair. Okay? So that means that Audre Lorde's name is out there. The other thing that we do every year, which we've done for almost 20 years, is have an annual Tony K. Bambara.
That's right.
I think I'm not incorrect. We're the only college that I know of that every year calls the name and celebrates a radical feminist writer. Okay, so we can we can do that. We can have endowed professorships. That's just one little quick thing that we could do.
Right. No, I think that's right.
But I think it's tied to a larger problem of the invisibility of black women, right? I mean, holding up Bell Hooks because she's a genius and everybody should hold her up. But it's almost that she survived and made a trail through these elite institutions, that she was like chopping down brush in order to walk on the path. And at these institutions, when you talk to black women, generally the handful that are, I mean, we're some tiny percentage of tenured professors and then full professors, it's, you know, smaller still. And you talk to black women students, we're not doing well. We're just not doing well. People will not tell you they necessarily feel they're flourishing. We might be well paid, but people will not necessarily. Well, you work in like you know, like, you know.
So let's unpack that a little bit. When you say we're not doing well, and we know that, right? What needs to happen?
But I'm asking from your perspective. So let's turn the mic on you because this is in your lane, right? Like you do diversity, equity, and inclusion
Absolutely.
here. And you get wind of what's happening with black when we want to be vocal, when we decide we want to stick our heads up and actually talk about it with someone.
So we know that when you stick your head up and you talk about it, you sometimes are labeled. Sometimes you're put in a category of the troublemaker, or sometimes you have a problem advancing to that next level, but it should not stop you.
Right.
I think that faculty members are freer than administrators in terms of being able to do that. But it's something Rebecca, I'm not sure, said earlier, that you have to find your voice and you have to kind of step out there. But we're at an inflection point where it's going to take the faculty, it's going to take the collaboration with administrators to speak up and hold people accountable. Because the thing that's difficult in higher education about DEI, it's not the diversity, it's not the inclusion, it's the equity.
Yes.
You know, people will always talk about diversity representation, and we'll talk about inclusion, making sure that, you know, you feel like you belong, but what's the equity? And sometimes, not sometimes, always with equity, you have to provide some people with a little bit more to level the playing field. And I don't think institutions are postured to do that. I think that there are just too many elements that make people, let me be very careful how I say that. There are too many times that if you do provide something for someone else, other people will pop their head up, and people don't want to put themselves, I don't want to say leadership, but don't want to put themselves in a position to be saying that, you know, you're being unfair.
Well, I think the first thing, you know, I think you made a good point, but again, I think these two incredible women that we've been talking about will argue we have to look really hard at the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
Equity in American higher education is an aspiration.
Yes. Yes.
It has never been a reality.
Yeah.
And therefore, everybody needs to get really clear that I don't know institutions. We have a huge variety of institutions in this country, and I just want to talk about the ones that I know best. There was never equity in those institutions. Never. Salary equity, equity around commitments to service, teaching loads, all of those kind of metrics. No, there were always people who were, and there continue to be people who are going to do a really huge amount of teaching because that was their strength, that's what they wanted to do, and they were allowed to do it, which did not mean that everybody else was asked to do the same thing. And it also meant that people who felt like the lane they wanted to be in was to become a big public intellectual and garner a great deal of attention for their work and then be reimbursed for the attention, the fact that they had become big public intellectuals. There's a whole host of things about it. But if anybody thinks that in these institutions that it looks like this room where all the chairs are the same size in equal length rows, no, that's not what it was. And in fact, the infusion, the more women and people of color have come into institutions has made it clear that the rows are not straight and the seats are not the same size. And there are a lot of people who don't like the fact that that is now visible. And so equity becomes something that really will speak directly to who has power and who doesn't have power. And as the time that I was senior vice provost for faculty development and diversity at Harvard was the first time I really learned that it's not just the seats were the same size. There were really, really big seats and really, really tiny seats among the same faculty. And it's like, oh, who knew? Who knew? It was never that, I mean, everybody understood it, but it was never visible. So making it visible has upset a lot of people. And so the people with those really, really big chairs, when you're trying to tell me I'm gonna have to go sit with one that's the same, no, not going there. I'm not gonna go and sit in one of those small chairs. So what are you gonna do to make them go sit in a small chair?
None.
And be a chair, it's the same size as everybody else's, or almost everybody else's chair. That's the struggle. It's a struggle now for where's the commitment to equity?
Let me say, I gotta say this. And this is what always gets me in trouble. There's no equity at HBCUs.
Oh,
either.
I know.
Okay,
Yeah,
now
I know that.
there is no equity. Most of our black colleges have had male presidents. There's no equity if you're queer. Okay, I mean, I can name all of the stuff, but we never talk about equity, and this is why I like Bell Hooks. A lot of her criticism was intra-racial. We never talk about these issues. We always talk about majority institutions. You wouldn't dare say what I just said.
Right.
There is no equity in higher education, period.
Right? Right, that's right.
Agreed. Well, okay.
I have to.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to. You guys can keep talking, but I do have to catch a plane. I'm sorry.
And we need to work on
Okay.
that.
Any quick questions? I know Evelyn's got to go. Any quick questions for Evelynn before she has to? Any quick questions for anyone?
Everybody tired.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you, Evelynn, and thank you all. Thank you.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Yay.
Thank you all for coming.